What a head, son! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to take you guys through the ultimate guide to Game Week 2. After a pretty high scoring Game Week 1, I'm pretty sure you guys are absolutely pumped for Game Week 2 to commence and are already waiting for that Saturday deadline. But there are some things that we still do have to talk about before that deadline does come about. Those things include, as I usually do on these preview / ultimate guide videos, I'm first going to be taking you guys through my own watch list and the players that I currently have my eyes on before moving on to the fixture ratings specifically for Game Week 2 from an attacking and a defensive point of view. We're then going to move on to the more highly anticipated talking points such as Gundogan replacements, who to replace the Man City midfielder with now that it has basically been confirmed that he will miss Game Week 2 unfortunately. And then finally, the captaincy debate between Mo Salah and Bruno Fernandes. So a little bit of a spoiler alert, I'm not only going to be focusing on these two assets, I might have a fixture in mind that might turn your head slightly more than Liverpool and United's, but we'll get onto that a little bit later on. So if the talking points covered in this introduction are something that you guys are interested in, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So firstly, I wanted to talk about Game Week 1 and just kind of the repercussions of Game Week 1 and what it means for our FPL season. So firstly, I want to say congratulations for getting through the first game week of the season. As I've seen over on Twitter, the large majority of the FPL community have done relatively well. You might have even broken the 100-point club. I did myself. You'll see that in the team selection coming up about Thursday evening, that we did have a relatively good game week to start off the season. I'm just kind of happy that we did have a better start than last season. If you guys remember, when Sadio Mane over Mo Salah, didn't make that mistake this season, and also didn't make the mistake of not going without Bruno Fernandes. As some of you have been commenting on that BRUNO draft, as I said at the start of that video, personally I wouldn't do that. So hopefully you guys kind of listen to that advice and listen to my own final team selection going into that Game Week 1 deadline. But if you guys didn't have those players, it's not the end of the world. As I said, last season went off to a terrible start, but I still managed to get a respectable rank come Game Week 38. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Please always remember that. But I also wanted to say that I am sorry if you guys are playing FPL for your first season. Game Week 1s are usually not like this. Game weeks in general aren't as high scoring. So I'm pretty sure the upcoming game weeks aren't going to be as exciting. But hopefully you guys manage to stick through the bad game weeks to get those really good game weeks. Wink, wink, those double game weeks coming up a little bit later in the season. I'm pretty sure those will be some of the best game weeks that you guys have in your FPL career. And I always am excited when those game weeks do turn around. But Game Week 1, as I mentioned, great game week to kind of go for. The one thing that I personally learned from Game Week 1 was that we have so many options in that midfield department. I just think we have so many options in general, and that's the exciting thing about this season, is that I think the variance is going to be quite high. Going for those mid-range options, those budget options in the midfield are going to make the difference between a good season and a bad season, in my opinion. We do still have some great options in attack in the forward department, but I generally think the midfield department just has a plethora of options. We saw a SARR for Watford turn out well, a BENRAHMA from West Ham doing the goods. I mean, those players were considered a bit more differential, and I think the majority of casual managers will probably bring them in come that Game Week 2 deadline. So a lot of options to go for. Hopefully the upcoming game weeks still keep the hype that the Game Week 1 had, but as I said, with these teams now kind of getting that fitness levels up, I think the fans back in the stadium played a big part in the high scoring affairs, because most home teams generally thought that they had to go for these fixtures. I'm just thinking back to maybe a Newcastle or West Ham. At the end of that fixture was absolute madness. Both sides kind of going for it at the end of that fixture. End-to-end kind of football. So I think that's kind of increased the goal scoring threat. And I think in the upcoming game weeks, it might be a little bit more conservative than all-out attack. So just keep that in mind. But as I said, there's a lot of options to go for. So hopefully you guys are going to enjoy the upcoming game weeks. So going on to the first talking point, we're going to be going over my watch list. And there are a couple of options coming up later on in the Gundogan replacements. And I didn't kind of want to duplicate talking about them. So you'll see that the watch list this week is a little bit interesting. And that interesting option is going to be Adama Traore. Now, before you guys go into the comments, roast me for this pick, because he only has about 1 goal and 1 assist in about 3 seasons. I know this pick might be a little bit out of left field, but I just think with those upcoming Wolves fixtures from Game Week 4 onwards, I had to highlight a Wolves option. And if you guys did watch the game that Wolves played, you probably would have seen that he apparently missed an absolute sitter. So I don't think that this pick is looking that great, but I do think it has potential. At that 6.0 kind of million price point, there are some options, but with those lovely fixtures coming up, I think that it does put the Wolves man in the kind of a question, and I think that I'll probably be monitoring him up until Game Week 4 to just see if he maybe picks up a bit of form so I can jump on that bandwagon before it manages to get a lot of steam. The next two picks are a lot better, I do promise you. It's going to be Tony from Brentford. Now, the thing that surprised me about Tony in that Arsenal fixture on Friday to kick off the Premier League season was that he looked like more of an assister than a scorer. We did see him kind of play in more of his Brentford teammates, which is a little bit surprising to me, but I do think in the upcoming fixtures, I'm going to be looking at him because I want to see him kind of start at that centre forward position and stay there. I don't want to see a Harry Kane 2.0. If you guys do remember, Harry Kane was providing assists for Heung-min Son last season. So I think with the Tony at that 6.5 bracket, I want to see him maybe pick up a bit more form in the scoring sense before I do look at him. But I think with Brentford, they look like a great side, a great promoted side. I haven't really seen many of these promoted sides be as good on the ball as them. And I think from an attacking point of view, look like an absolute attacking machine. So I'm also looking at them maybe for opponents because I don't think there's going to be too much defensive action from their side. But I think from an attacking point of view, great options to go for. And at 6.5, if he can prove better value than the midfielders, I will jump on him pretty soon. The final player is going to be Heung-min Son, and no kind of questions or introduction needed there. Scored against Man City with a lovely kind of curler from outside the box, and I think that's only a kind of taste of what's to come for Heung-min Son if Harry Kane manages to stay out of the team. So that's kind of the question mark, and I don't really know what side of the fence I sit. I don't know if I'm in the park that thinks without Harry Kane, Son is a better option, or if I'm in the park that if Harry Kane returns back to that Spurs lineup, he's an even better option. It's a little bit of a debate for me, and I can see it kind of going both ways, but I still think that at 10 million, Heung-min Son could be a great option with these lovely upcoming Spurs fixtures. And I think the fixture that you're probably going to be looking at is game week 3 against Watford when the likes of Liverpool play Chelsea and then United face Wolves. So two a little bit tougher fixtures there for those respective teams. So you might not want to captain a Bruno Fernandes or Mo Salah, and that kind of opens the gate there for a Heung-min Son from game week 3 onwards. And I think from my own personal point of view, we have had this news of a potential Mo Salah missing game week 4. So my current consensus is that I might be moving Mo Salah to Heung-min Son come game week 3 when Liverpool do take on Chelsea. Just from a captaincy point of view, I think it could be a nice shout to go for the Spurs assets instead of the United or the Liverpool ones. So Heung-min Son firmly on my radar. I might just take game week 2 to monitor the situation and see if Harry Kane actually ends up returning to the Spurs lineup or gets his move to Man City, and we can see him start in front of Kevin De Bruyne and Jack Grealish. Because I think now that Harry Kane has come through a full week of training, he should be fine to start on the weekend. So it'll be quite interesting to see what comes out of that. So now moving on to the fixture ratings, and what I did was I went over to Fantasy Football Fix and I went to their fixture analyzer or fixture ticker, whatever you want to call it, and I rated the fixtures from an attack and a defensive point of view. So starting off with the attacking fixtures there, no surprise, we have Man City versus Norwich. And spoiler alert here, I am really favoring that fixture from a captaincy point of view, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But hands down, Man City versus Norwich is the best fixture to kind of target. I'm really jealous of those of you who managed to pick up a Mahrez or a Grealish, or maybe even bringing in a Kevin De Bruyne before that Norwich fixture. I mean, that could be an absolute differential to go for, but I definitely think that this is the fixture to kind of target with those transfers if you guys want to take a 1 week punt. A little surprised they're coming up with Brighton versus Watford. I don't think we really think of Brighton as a super attacking side, but they do put up a good XG every once in a while. So against Watford, this could perfectly be the case. I'm really happy to see that Aston Villa versus Newcastle is rated 3rd place because I do have a double up of Danny Ings and also Buendia in that midfield slot. So I really do hope that Aston Villa can kind of get on the scoring boots here against Newcastle. Crystal Palace against Brentford, also a little bit of a surprising one there, but I think that might just because the promoted sides are rated quite lowly from an attack and a defensive point of view. So interesting thing there for Crystal Palace, maybe if you own a Wilfred Zaha or Benteke, that could be a shout to go for. We then have the popular fixture of the game week. It's going to be Liverpool versus Burnley, a fixture that probably will see a lot of captaincy placed on Mo Salah, or even maybe a Sadio Mane if you want to go for it. But I do think that the Liverpool fixture, although it's not rated as highly, I do think it's one of the best fixtures to kind of target with that captaincy. And it'll be interesting to see that United is actually rated 2 fixtures worse, even though in my opinion Southampton have the worst defense compared to Burnley. Another couple fixtures here, West Ham, Leicester, Everton, Leeds, also Leeds versus Everton's rated here. Leeds are actually rated as having a better fixture against Everton than Everton have against Leeds, which is quite an interesting comparison there. And it's going to be quite interesting to see how that game actually turns out in game week 2. But in terms of my fixtures that I would target, 100% Man City versus Norwich. I then would look at Aston Villa versus Newcastle, and then finally the big boys of Liverpool versus Burnley and Manchester United versus Southampton. Now going on to the defensive side of things, and we still do have the Man City versus Norwich game a lot above the rest here at number 1 spot. But then the interesting thing is we yet again have Crystal Palace versus Brentford. Now I personally don't think that this fixture should be so high on the defensive ratings, as I think that Brentford from an attacking point of view are quite a solid side, and Crystal Palace's defense isn't the best in the world, so I wouldn't personally rate this that highly. But obviously Fantasy Football Fix has their algorithm, has their data behind it, so you might trust them besides my own intuition. But I think that I would rate this fixture a little bit lower than it currently is. Liverpool versus Burnley, 100% I can understand that, because Liverpool's defense since Virgil van Dijk has come back has quite a higher odds of keeping a clean sheet than it did last season, so I expect Liverpool to probably keep a clean sheet against Burnley. Famous last words there, so hopefully I didn't jinx it. We then have Brighton versus Watford, which for me is no surprise there, because it is a home fixture for Brighton. Brighton's defense is usually quite solid. I know against Burnley in game week 1 didn't look that great, but I think I'll take the second half performance over the first half performance any day of the week. Aston Villa versus Newcastle, understandable, but I do expect Newcastle to probably score on that one just because of how good they looked against West Ham, especially in that first half. We then kind of filter down with some other fixtures where I don't think the chances of keeping a clean sheet are that high, but there might be some surprises in game week 2. So now moving on to probably the most important talking point from our own specific team, it's going to be Gundogan and what to do with the Man City midfielder. So if you guys haven't been on Twitter today, you wouldn't have noticed that there has been news that he has picked up that shoulder injury that's going to be keeping him out for the foreseeable future. Now it's not going to be as long as maybe earlier anticipated. It's not going to be 7 weeks long. I think it's going to be about 1 week, 2 weeks. But in terms of Gundogan and Man City, I brought him in for that game week 2 fixture against Norwich, and that was kind of the sole reason why I was targeting him. And now that he's going to miss that fixture, I have to take him out. And now what options should we be looking at? So for my own personal team, I cannot afford anyone more expensive than Gundogan. So 7.5 is the maximum amount of money that I can be spending. So if you guys can afford more expensive options such as a Heung-min Son, I would obviously look at him. In terms of the Man City options, a Jack Grealish, a Mahrez, I definitely would target those two assets because you still are going to get that Man City versus Norwich fixture. And now with Gundogan out, it's one less spot to kind of compete for. So it's going to make Mahrez and Grealish even more assured options in that starting 11. So those two options, 100% go for them. I would probably look at them. There is also the option of Greenwood at the exact same price that Gundogan comes in at, 7.5 million. So I personally do own him, but I definitely would be looking at him as a strong contender for that spot that Gundogan is going to kind of leave empty, because I think that Greenwood will start the next couple of games out of position at that striker position. And you saw this weekend against Leeds that he was playing quite well at that striker position. And I think we are a couple of weeks away for Cavani and Martial to get back to full fitness and take his spot in that starting 11. So I won't be covering Greenwood. As I said, I own him already, so I'm not going to be talking about him too much, but that's probably my favorite option to go for if you guys don't own the Manchester United midfielder / striker. So the first option that we're going to be talking about comes in a lot cheaper than Gundogan comes in at, and that's going to be SARR from Watford. So we spoke about Watford getting off to a really good start against Aston Villa in game week 1. It was a home fixture, which I think is going to be credited to a lot of that kind of Watford's good performance, to be honest. And I think that's probably what we're going to be seeing in these couple opening fixtures of this season, is that the home fixtures are probably going to be the ones that we are going to target. And that's the one thing that worries me about SARR and Watford, is that their next two are tough fixtures and they're away fixtures. So firstly, we have Brighton, which we've spoken about, have a really good defense, and I think that that's going to keep up in this new Premier League season. And we have Spurs away as well, which I think is one of those games that you really don't know which Spurs side is going to kind of pitch up. We could have a really bad defensive performance from Spurs and then Watford look absolutely outstanding, or we could have a really good performance from Spurs and then we're going to kind of want to avoid anyone that plays them. So it's a kind of tough spot to be in, but then I think after that the fixtures do look quite enticing. We have Norwich away and then Newcastle at home. So those two fixtures, 100% fixtures that I would target. So maybe my thinking with SARR and Watford in general is that I might wait for them, and then once game week 4 kind of kicks in and then I want to get rid of my Aston Villa options, I might look at the Watford midfielder for a potential transfer in come game week 4 against Wolves. That's my current thinking on him, but he is still expected to score a lot of points from game week 2 to 7, and that's what I went for, those projected points. Went over to Fantasy Football Fix and looked at their predicted points tool, and for the next 5 fixtures he's predicted to score 25.2 points, which isn't too shabby, to be honest, and I would definitely be considering him, and he might be my second favorite option. But let's get on to some others. So the next option is probably the one that I would go for if I want to be conservative. Now the big thing about RAPHINHA and kind of the South American players in general is that news has come out that FIFA has changed the regulation that clubs can ban players from going on the international duty. And why that's a kind of a problem for us FPL managers is that Brazil have a couple of international qualifiers coming up from game week 3 onwards, and that might make RAPHINHA miss game week 4 and even more potentially game week 5. And why I'm saying game week 5 is that Brazil is currently a red zone regarded by the UK in terms terms of travel, so they might have to isolate in either their house or a hotel when they do come back from those international games. So that's a little bit of a problem there, because it means Raphinha might miss game week 4 and game week 5, which definitely will make me reconsider transferring him in. And that's kind of the dilemma that I'm in currently, because it looks like there's no options for the clubs, and maybe Raphinha picks up one of those mysterious injuries before those international qualifiers and then manages to come back for game week 4 and 5. So it's a little bit of a dilemma there, as I said, but I definitely think from a conservative approach, I want Raphinha for the upcoming game weeks anyways. I want those Leeds assets because their fixtures do turn around game week 5, and I can honestly see the Brazilian midfielder being in my side for the majority of the season if he manages to stay fit. So 6.5, relatively good price there, and he does come in as the second highest predicted point scorer in the selection that I've come up with 27.3 points. So really respectable, and I do think if he manages to start the majority of games for Leeds and isn't kind of isolating, he will do quite well in their upcoming fixtures. The next option to go for is going to be the option that's predicted to score the most points by Fantasy Football Fix, and it's going to be Harvey Barnes from Leicester. So 7.0 million is definitely a price that I can afford, but it's just those terrible fixtures, in my opinion, for Leicester that are kind of outlined by some really good ones. So first off, we do have West Ham, which I think is going to be quite a tough game depending on how kind of West Ham are playing against Newcastle. Their defense didn't look that strong, but I do think they'll kind of tighten things up at the back when they do face Leicester. So that's a tough game. We then have the best fixture of the bunch. We have Norwich away for Leicester, which is probably a fixture that I might even consider captaining Harvey Barnes in when Liverpool do face Chelsea and United face Wolves, as I stated in the introduction. So Norwich, that's a perfectly fine game to go for. But then they have Man City at home. We did see that Son managed to score against them, so I mean maybe Harvey Barnes can score on the counter-attack, but I don't really play the odds of Man City, and any team that faces them, I consider that to be a bad fixture. So that's a really bad fixture to go for. Then we have Brighton away, which is probably equal, but not as bad from a defensive point of view. So Brighton away, not great, but then they face Burnley in game week 6, which might make up for those bad fixtures preceding that game. So in terms of Harvey Barnes, I think if the fixtures were a little bit better, I would definitely be looking at him. But there is also this thing in the back of my mind that's thinking that maybe Brendan Rodgers switches things up, benches Harvey Barnes, and plays Iheanacho with the 2 up front or something like that. I just don't know if Harvey Barnes is the most nailed option to go for. And the fact is that even if he does play, usually comes off about 70 minutes. He's not getting the full 90 minutes anyway. So that's the only thing about Harvey Barnes. And I think it might maybe be worth taking a risk on one of the cheaper options that are more guaranteed to play and also have better fixtures. So now going on to the final pick of these kind of Gundogan replacements, and it's going to be Benrahma from West Ham. So this might be a little bit of one of those knee-jerk transfers, but after a really stellar game week 1, he looks like he could be absolute FPL gold. So coming in at 6.0 million, and the thing about West Ham is if they do keep up the current form they're on, which looks pretty good, I can see these upcoming fixtures being quite good fixtures from a West Ham point of view. Starting off with Leicester, kind of spoke about this with Harvey Barnes. I think this game will be quite a close one, so I'm not really expecting too much from Benrahma and this game overall, but then fixtures against Crystal Palace and Southampton come up next, which are plum fixtures in my opinion, and definitely I think that Benrahma can get a couple of hauls out of that one. So that's why I think I am kind of targeting Benrahma at the current moment, is that I think game week 3 and 4 look absolutely great, and I need kind of a nailed option for these upcoming game weeks to have, as I think I might have to spend my transfers in other positions. So he is predicted to score the lowest out of these selections, but just remember that the Fantasy Football Fix algorithm might be based on last season, and last season wasn't a great season for him, but it does look like this season might be kind of the birth of him as a West Ham player and an FPL option overall. United and Leeds follow up from those lovely 2 fixtures. With United, that's not a great game, to be honest. I think that United will be overall defensively quite strong this season, and with Leeds we saw against United, this could be one of those games where Leeds choose not to defend, or they could defend quite well. It's just kind of up to chance of what happens in that fixture, unfortunately. So I think Benrahma currently might be my favorite option to go for, just because firstly he has the cheap price, and then secondly he also has some nice fixtures on the horizon, and Over and Ismail Sarr might have slightly better fixtures in my opinion, and that's why I think I might be targeting the West Ham midfielder to come in as my Gundogan replacement. So finally, going on to the CAMEWEEK, which is probably what you guys have been waiting for. You might have skipped to the end of this video, which hopefully you didn't, as you might have missed some interesting points that we talked about for the upcoming game week 2. But with the CAMEWEEK for game week 2, it's one of the more interesting weeks that we're going to be able to choose from, and I just think it's because Mo Salah and Bruno Fernandes had a really good game week 1, so I think that both players are on FPL managers' minds. The next player that I wanted to talk about is going to be Kevin De Bruyne, or Man City in general. As you guys know, just because I go for a Mo Salah Salah doesn't mean that I'm not considering a Sadio Mane. I simply pick the most popular option from every team, and then I talk about the other options that you guys can go for. So Kevin De Bruyne could easily become a Mahrez, a Torres, or maybe a Grealish if you guys want to go for him. So I think that the Man City game is probably the one that I'll be targeting. And I think that if I did own a Man City asset, you probably brought them in because of this Norwich game. So I would kind of attack this with all my might and go for the CAMEWEEK on either a Mahrez, De Bruyne, or a Grealish. I just think this fixture is too good to not turn up. It's Man City at home against the weak side. I think this game is going to have quite a few goals in it, and you just have to kind of bet that your option that you have in your own team is going to be on the majority of those attacking returns. So I think this Norwich game, although most managers are probably looking at Fernandes and Mo Salah, I think this game would be my favorite option to kind of go for, and I would recommend going for it if you do have those options in your side. But if you are a more boring manager like myself, I have a Bruno Fernandes, I have a Mo Salah, no Man City unfortunately with Gundogan kind of out. So who of these two do we kind of go for? To be honest, I don't think you can go wrong with captaining either of them. I think that both games will be quite profitable for Manchester United and Liverpool against two sides that haven't got off to the best start of the Premier League season. Now, the one thing that managers have been saying is that they would rather target the home fixture versus the away game, and kind of coming from game week 1, we saw this. The home fixtures usually were quite good for the home teams compared to the away teams, so that could be a good thinking to go for. But I just think when I look at Burnley and I look at Southampton, I would rather target Southampton versus Burnley. And the main reason for that is that I think Burnley will sit back, kind of park the bus a lot against Liverpool, where Southampton generally are more of an attacking side. So I think that United could get in behind those Southampton defenders a little bit more than the Liverpool defenders against Burnley, and that's just something that you have to take into account, is the play styles of both these opposition. And I think from an offensive point of view, I consider Southampton to be worse than Burnley. So I'm not going to lie to you guys, from game week 1 onwards, I've been on Bruno Fernandes as my captain, and I might just be because I am a Liverpool fan, but I think Liverpool against Burnley hasn't always been the best fixture, and from a Mo Salah point of view, his history against them isn't always the greatest. But then we have had this season, last season, where no home fans were there, but you could also argue that maybe having fans there raises the anticipation, raises the nervousness, and maybe the Liverpool players kind of pick up on that vibe and don't play the best game overall. But I can honestly say that going with either of these options is going to return you points, in my opinion. It's just kind of hard to predict who returns the most out of both of them. Now, I do think if you guys are unsure of who to go for, I would probably go with Mo Salah, because he's going to be captained by more options, and therefore is the less risky option to go for, because if he does blank, the majority of managers have captained him anyway, so there's no real risk there if he does end up kind of not returning. Whereas with Bruno Fernandes, if Mo Salah bangs and Bruno Fernandes blanks, you're going to be on the receiving end of quite a low game week 2 score. So maybe something that will help you guys out on kind of choosing who to captain, I know personally I use this algorithm quite a lot, is the Fantasy Football Fix Points Predictor. And what I've done is I've gone for the 3 highest predicted point scorers for game week 2, and you can see on screen, no Bruno Fernandes there. If memory serves me right, I think he was predicted to score about 6 points, and I've seen a lot of algorithms, a lot of betting odds currently favoring Mo Salah to score more than Bruno Fernandes will in game week 2. So Mo Salah predicted to score the second most points with 7, which is pretty respectable for a CAPTAINCY return. Sadio Mane comes in there as a differential if you guys want to go for him at 6.5, but then we have Kevin De Bruyne against Norwich with a massive 7.7 predicted points, which is currently why I think that's backing up my thinking of that you have to target the Man City fixture if you guys do have those assets. Simply the fixture that I think will have the highest scoring game, so that's why I think that it makes sense if you do have a Man City option in that midfield or that forward department to target them, as I think that it could be quite profitable. So that's basically a wrap of the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like it if you did, and subscribe if you're new and have not subscribed yet. I'll be seeing you guys for some more content coming up later in the week, with the team selection coming up on Thursday, and then a deadline stream coming up on Saturday afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you guys are around the world. I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers. Bye.